Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson. Thank you for being here today. I love this show and I love having you be part of the show. It means so much to me, and it's just continuing to be more uh, hard work and more successful than I anticipated. So it's all thanks to you. So thank you for being here. As always, I do encourage you to come to CourtneyAnderson.com. We're adding new content daily and doing everything that we can to create a community of solutions and hopefully continue to be a resource for you. So join into our discussion. And I also want to take a moment to let you know that this is one of the Educators Eden series shows. Of course, Educators Eden is our series, which is all about educators. It's all about honoring and admiring and sharing knowledge about those educators who are literally living in paradise. They have found that and created that space where their interests and their pleasure and joy and things that make them content are fulfilled through and by and supported and expanded with their teaching. So it's just a win-win, right? That cliche, when you do what you love. So our specific show today is teaching the underachiever. Teaching the underachiever. Teaching the underachiever. So we had a sort of a three-part analysis. We had a teaching the overachiever, teaching the achiever, and teaching the underachiever show. So if you haven't checked out the other two shows and you'd like to, please do so. And of course, part of what I've shared in this series and in the other companion shows is, in all full disclosure, right? I love teaching. It's been something that I never really thought when I was, a kid, a young person, that teaching was maybe something I was interested in. Um, but the components of teaching, right? I love to communicate. I love to share knowledge. I love learning new things. All of that I knew I loved. I just didn't really understand that I could assemble all those sort of discrete aspects into one kind of awesome professional activity called teaching. And so that's the again, me being very honest, I'm biased. I enjoy this. It makes me happy. Teaching does. And so, of course, one of the things that we do when we enjoy something is often we want to do everything in our power to continue to be able to enjoy it, right? So, looking at our education skills, looking at our teaching outcomes is really important. I want to talk very definitively about the outcomes in terms of the teaching, the teacher's perspective. So I'm not talking about, oh, how well did my students score on an exam or something of that nature. That's not the equation and the focus that I use in my teaching. Now, I have spent the majority and all of my, I was going to say, dedicated, time as a full-time and part-time educator has been in universities, and mostly it's been in graduate school programs. So it's different than it would be someone who might be maybe was teaching a primary school second grade student, and it gives me a little bit different perspective. My perspective on the outcomes is that I continue to love it, right? So that means I need to have an environment conducive to my own individual educators' Eden success, right? So I love information, I love knowledge, I love diversity of information. So I need to be able to work with institutions and within curriculum that allows me to continue to learn new things. I wouldn't enjoy just sort of regurgitating something that I already had um, previously taught over and over again. I mean, at a certain level, you build upon something but the thing that excites me and kind of academically turns me on is learning something new. And so I seek out and try to do everything I can to be in environments where that's part of what I do is bring something new to the teaching and basically to my own love of information. And so I've shared in other programs that one of the ways I do that, as of the moment that we're recording the show, my teaching is graduate students, graduate business students, and MBA students, and it's online. So I teach through that modality. And one of the ways I bring new information is that every day, you're reading what's going on in the world and in media, and I'm bringing current events into the classroom, interjecting them into discussions or into our, sort of class awareness. And I apply recent events to creating exam questions or paper case studies. And so that is fun. The other thing that I do when we talk about outcomes, and of course we always, in all of the programs we do for Solutions with Courtney Anderson in any area, whether it's our law lovers or management or HR or any of our fields, we're always talking about, surpassing our goals. As an educator, we should have our goals, of course, that we're working on surpassing. And so I'm sharing some of the ways I do that. And so my outcomes, how happy am I? How much do I enjoy it? What are the things that make me happy as an educator? I do not have a perspective where I perceive the educator of adults and especially graduate students to be responsible for what the student earns in terms of their grades. That to me is um, not logical because it's obviously it's an adult um, graduate scholar, and what my responsibility though is to set the environment for them to be able to meet and surpass their own goals. So I'm sharing how I set my and work to create and craft a teaching environment so that I can surpass my goals, right? So I'm telling you what I need. I need, the flexibility of the curriculum. I need to be able to integrate this new information into a case study, into a paper, into an exam question, into a discussion. I need to have that. Otherwise, if I have the information and I can't use it, it's frustrating and limiting and kind of makes me sad, right? Because I love applying the knowledge. That's what makes me happy, is applying it. And so I'm sharing some ways I do that. For my students, I'm just as responsible to do everything in my power to help create an environment for them to meet and surpass their goals, right? So how do you do that? Well, one of the things that you have to do when you think about teaching is in any course, and even if you have the most highly credentialed students, and in many of my classes, my students to gain admission all already have to have at least another graduate degree. So I'm talking about a very small pool of students, even graduate students in general, at universities have to have already an undergrad degree. And so again, you're winnowing down from a sort of a general population pool down to people who already possess at least a bachelor's degree. In some instances, I teach classes people already possess at least one master's degree or have other professional certifications, like they're certified public accountant or something of that nature. So I understand that some of the the opportunities that I have in terms of what I consider to be goals are going to be specific to those populations, which are narrow and small pools, right? Because we have very small numbers of the overall population of adults that already have one graduate degree. So by the time I'm teaching someone in a second graduate degree program, of course, it's a small population, and they already have a lot of traits that that have contributed to their success. I mean, there's a reason why they already have another graduate degree, right? Um, but even within these very well defined groups, it's if someone was teaching in a middle school or a high school, and they had, especially in many parts of the world, but in the US, they'll have programs, they'll have certain schools where students qualify to get into that school. They'll have certain classes and types of programs for gifted and talented students. So if someone's teaching in that program, of course they're going to have a smaller slice of a population, of the general population. Yet even within these small slices of general population, you still have a distribution. You're still going to have sort of your underachiever. Now, underachiever may be the student who is fine with a low passing grade. So it's not someone who underachieves and at a level where they really are just unable to perform. But you're still going to have a distribution, right, of your, relatively speaking, underachiever, achiever, and then your overachiever. So my argument is that the the idea that I need to be able to walk into any population and know that I'm going to have some underachievers, achievers, and overachievers is going to apply even if you're teaching very highly credentialed and sophisticated populations, or if you're teaching a general population. You're just going to have sort of a wider spread, obviously, in that distribution if you have just sort of an open access program at, of 10-year-olds, right? So all that's to say, some of what we're talking about is universal. The idea that what I'm sharing in Educators Eden, when I talk about outcomes, and it's divorced from the educators' outcomes, or divorced from what the students' grades are, is because of the population that I teach. And I understand in many other, especially primary and secondary school programs, in some countries, now this is again unusual, in some countries there's a movement toward the teacher outcome being tied to what the students' actual scores are, which is challenging. I can understand a teacher outcome being tied to a student's growth. So if a student moves from, they mastered 50% of the content to now they've mastered 55% of it, that's improvement. It's not necessarily going to be that the student maybe is mastering sort of what the average expectation is, but they have improved. I mean, you have to take your students where you get what you get in terms of where they are. What I think an educator, I know an educator's, again, responsibility, as I was saying, is to set the environment conducive to everybody, the underachiever, the achiever, and the overachiever, surpassing their individual goals, which will all be different. That is our educator's responsibility. I don't necessarily think that it's reasonable then to expect us to get everyone to earn a certain type of outcome, because people have different perceptions of what's important to them. And again, I'm speaking here to university students. I'm not speaking to primary students, but I have to mention a lot of this because in education, so much of this, especially in the States, is of huge discussion, and it really impacts educators' paradise in Eden. So all that's to say, we have underachievers no matter how they're dispersed in our group, just because that's the nature of a group, right? You're going to have someone who scored lower and someone who scored higher, or someone whose work is one quality level and someone whose work is another quality level. Okay, so what's an underachiever? I went to our dictionary, as I often do in many of our programs, and just took this definition. And underachiever: someone such as a student or athlete who does not perform as well or work as hard as he or she can. Now, I think that's really important, right? So it's not what sort of what the best score is. Let's say the best score is 100%. It's not that everybody who doesn't achieve 100% is an underachiever. It's the idea that the student is doing the best they can with obviously the skills that they have, um, the knowledge base that they have, things of that nature. So that's what we're talking about. Now, when we look at that, there's, I think, sort of two big picture groups this applies to, and this is, of course, very simplified. One would be the group that actually has the skills to perform at a very high level, but is choosing not to do so because of a lack of motivating factors. So that's the student who sort of, you look and there's so much research out there, right? Why is my gifted student underachieving? My student is bright, but they're not doing what they can. And you really hear that with young children and with parents. That's a motivation issue. Now, again, it's different by the time you get to elective education. University, undergraduate, and graduate programs are electives. You're not mandated to do that. It's different from, again, primary and secondary school. In many nations, it's mandatory. In the U.S., it is. So when you look at the person who really has the ability, the skill level, the writing skills, the math skills, they just are bored. So they don't turn their work in, they're not interested, they don't show up. That's one type of a challenge. That's an underachiever who just doesn't have a motivation. I've shared in other programs, in other series, some of my own challenges with school, especially my focus on getting things done quickly when I was a younger person at the expense of really anything else. So when I was in school, I just wanted to show up for the test. I mean, just give me the test because that's the only part that really I have to do, and that's the only part I really care about. Because I needed to get my credits really quickly so that I could move on to the next thing. And that did come in situations where I had too many classes I was enrolled in, or I had outcomes that were negative, or I had to withdraw from classes, or in some instances I had low grades just because I wasn't putting any really time or attention in anything other than what I needed to do to finish it. I was just focused on finishing. And by the time I got into to college and university, I just wanted to finish really quickly, which I did, right? I graduated with my bachelor's degree. I was 20 years old. That was great. In my mind, it was slow because I could have finished it like 19. I'm not kidding. Um, it was just this obsession with speed. So I had a motivator, but that motivator wasn't necessarily tied to what an individual educator would see. So I'm sure there's educators, if they even noticed that I was in their classes, which they probably didn't, would have said the person doesn't show up. I don't see a lot of consistency from them, and they were true. I didn't. I was just looking at what's the bare minimum calculation I need to finish with a passing grade enough so I can move on to the next thing. It wasn't something where I was trying to immerse myself in all of the experiences, and I do regret that now, certainly. But to thine own self be true. You have to be honest about these things. So when you look at somebody who's lacking motivation that has the skill set, it's usually related to something like um, they don't they have their own calculation for the program. Um, and what you would need to do as an educator is to try to tie, if you can, it would be great ideally, depending on your class size. Now, depending on where you are in the world, sometimes the systems don't support teachers being able to really do their best job because there's just too many students, and it's impossible with a certain number. There's no way you're going to be able to build with personal relationships with just large massive amounts of people. It's just not, there's not enough time in the day. But if you have a small enough class size, ideally you want to get to know students, so ask them, why are you here? The first thing I ask my students, I do this in my classes. I also do this in my corporate education programs where I'm at an organization at their job teaching some important organizational related issue. I ask them, why are you here? Because it is the most important question for a couple of reasons. One, they need to think about this. Why am I here? And the other thing is, if they tell you, then they'll be giving you on a silver platter the answer to what motivates them. They will tell you why they're there. So if I have a student in a grad program and says to me, I'm here because my employer says I need to have a graduate degree for the promotion I want, and they're going to pay for it, and that's all I want is the degree, then it gives me a lot of information. They may not have the time or the interest necessarily in sort of an elaborate analysis of an ethical theory I put forward. They just want to know enough bare minimum to get the passing, whatever that is, grade so they can get the degree. That's all that, and they've told me that. So now I know how to reach that student, right? And I also know how, when I evaluate them, put it in that context. Yes, I'm sure they probably could have done better if they allocated more time and resources to it, but they didn't because they don't want to, because that's not why they're here. And that's absolutely something then that makes me understand that I'm doing my best as an educator. They're meeting and exceeding their goals, right? So, and I communicate, I do everything in my power to communicate. I don't try, but I do communicate to them. Um, you know, this was what it was, and I know you can do better. Here's some of the strengths, and it's me understanding what motivates them. So the unmotivated but capable group is one group, and you need to figure out what's motivating them. Sometimes with younger people, you're going to get people who, and I saw this as a young person. I had my own obsession with trying to get stuff done quickly. Um, but I knew other students who were really, intellectually capable. I knew that because might spend time with them. But they wouldn't at all perform in class. And it would be because socially they wanted to be accepted by their peer group. And you see this especially with young people. And I was going to say especially with males, but you see it with males and females, different peer pressure, right? So nobody wants to be sort of shunned socially, especially as a sort of a young person, adolescent. So people would intentionally not do well academically because doing so they felt would diminish their value socially. Men and women, yeah, young females and males. So that's a challenge. If you figure that out, then that helps you teach them, right? So the unmotivated and capable group is one group. The other group is they're motivated as heck. They are just motivated. And I see this, I've seen this consistently as a university teacher. They are motivated, but their skills are not where they need to be. But they are motivated. They are the first one there in the class. They are there all the time. When I teach traditional classroom, they're there before the professor enters the lecture. They're there to the end. They come to my office hours with great questions. When I teach online, they are there constantly. They're asking me questions before the class even starts. They are dedicated. They're organized. They turn in everything. They get every point they can out of every assignment, especially this sort of, if there's more simplistic assignments, they're going to definitely max out on those and get every point they can because they often, if not almost always, know that they have skill deficiencies. So they're poor writers, they have really weak math skills. They'll know that though. And so the way they compensate for it is they're always there. They're going to get every single point they can. They're going to show up all the time. They read everything because they are highly motivated. They just have really weak skills. That's a challenge too, because as an educator, you don't want that student to get through your course, your program, your curriculum without the skills they need. But when you have somebody who's so motivated, they're not going to ever have anything that's, late. They're not going to miss anything, any of their assignments. Everything's going to be turned in. Now, it's not going to be high quality, the highest quality. And so working with that student is, again, understanding what's motivating them. That's the first part. And then once you see these amazingly impressive organization skills, commitment, dedication, tenacity, then you focus on that as a positive and move towards a skill development, right? So sometimes those students will have discussions and explain where you are right now. You're going to be at, whatever, 75% out of 100 in terms of your skill set. But you can master that extra 25% or some level of it. Let's talk about how. Do you need tutoring? Here are the issues that are really seriously impacting your work. Here are the resources available for you to obtain those extra one-on-one developmental skill experts, and that's what you need. And just doing that often is what is sort of the key that unlocks it for that highly motivated and disciplined student. They want it. That's why they're so organized and disciplined. They just need to know how to attain those extra skills. So that's part of that, right? So I've tried to big picture address the issues. One of the things I think that's really important when we look at this, the underachievers, the why. So we talked about, big picture, the motivated and highly skilled, or the unmotivated, highly skilled, and the motivated, weakly skilled, and looked at that. There's a couple of things in the show notes I pointed out, though, when we talk about underachievers that are incredibly important, and that tie directly to a lot of what I do in my classroom. One thing I do in my classroom is I do an excessive amount, according to many other people, of language that you won't be surprised if you're part of this program. That's very motivational and encouraging and uplifting and energetic and passionate. It's the motivational speaker side of me. And again, it's so weird. As a young person, I didn't think about being an educator, and I didn't even know a motivational speaker is like a job. I really didn't. I didn't know that until I actually started doing it. And I've talked about that in other programs. But the weird thing is, these are all the same parts of me that have been here all along, right? Part of the reason I'm so sort of uplifting and you can do it, come on, we can do it, let's make it fun. Yeah, part of it is fun to me. If it wasn't fun and I wasn't sort of, turned on academically and jazzed about it, I wouldn't do it. Like if I thought this was the most boring, horrible stuff ever, I wouldn't do it. I'd go do something else. So whenever I hear someone who tells me that they're an educator and they're so dispassionate, it's hard for me to and a lot of this, I guess, it's all culturally relative, and I understand that I'm very, according to other people, although in my mind I don't see it, it can be a bit over the top. It's just that you're trying to get people, your underachiever, who's already either highly skilled and unmotivated or super motivated and has poor skills. You got to pull them in. You have to make this something that they notice, that's something that they're hearing you, that they're reading what you're sending them, that they care. You're not going to be able to do anything in communicating information if you can't get their attention. And for those of you who are in marketing, PR, public relations, you know this. The hardest part is getting their attention. And so, yeah, I do believe that part of being an educator, who cares about outcomes. Again, I don't feel like the outcome is the grade, but my outcome is to ensure that I create the environment for every student to meet and exceed their individual goals. That's my job. And then, of course, to continue to be happy myself with new information and the things that kind of excite me. I do think it's my job to get their attention. If I don't get their attention and this again is culturally dependent, but if they don't even know I'm here, then how in the world am I going to be able to convey this super great information I'm excited about, or to be able to help them develop the skills that they would need to exceed their goals if they don't even notice me? So again, the way this is done can be through your own personality traits, but I do think you need to do something to get people's attention. So, and I know I've offended people when I mention marketing and PR, but to a certain extent it is that. And I don't think in an unhealthy, crass way. I mean, it's, a wonderful poem, a fantastic song. They reach people, they touch people, they change people's lives in a very real way. How do you do that if nobody ever hears your song? People have to hear it. How do you do it if nobody ever has a chance to read your poem? People have to read it. So I don't think that's a negative thing to say. Look, you have this creative, beautiful, artistic experience as an educator, but people need to be in the class. You as an educator with nobody to teach, you're not educating. All the fun is gone. So why not share in your own personality? It doesn't have to be high volume. It doesn't have to be high speed. It can be whatever your personality is, but just share that knowledge. It can come through in any manner of your, again, your natural personality, but you need to show that I care about this. And that gets people's attention. And then you have a better opportunity potentially to reach your underachievers. So when we look at the underachievers, one of the challenges for people, and one of the reasons that I intentionally do so much of the we can do it. Part of it is it's just my personality. The other part of it is I've been a student who has certainly underachieved because I was so focused on my other tasks of whatever. Usually was finishing something quickly, or I had a lot on my plate or whatever. So I know what it's like, and I also know what it's like when I've been in a situation where I've not been achieving what I could because of things in my life that I'd prioritize. And I've had educators say to me directly. I have so many of these stories, but I had somebody when I was in high school tell me I would never be able to go to college because people of my ethnic background, I think she said Negro students, don't go to college. Really? I was, when I say that, I mean, it was silly. I've shared in other programs. My parents are both college graduates with multiple college degrees, and my grandparents, and I'm the fourth generation of college graduate on one side of my family, and the fifth generation on another side. Why do I mention that? Because that's how embedded it is in my experience as a person growing up, and it's silly that somebody would tell me that I wasn't going to go to college. I mean, that was like telling me that I, am not breathing oxygen. Well, of course I am. It's silly. But the person said that because they made these external decisions based on what I look like. And in fairness, some of my lack of attendance to programs that I felt weren't that important because I just needed to show up for the test. And had I been someone who wasn't so steeped in knowing what I believed was my worth and what I believed I was going to do, what if I was somebody who's nobody had ever gone to college in their family and somebody had told me that, who was a guidance counselor or someone in a position of authority? That could have derailed somebody's entire life. And then when I went to college, I had several professors at undergrad and definitely in law school, and um, not so much, well, a little bit in my MBA program, but not recently. So, who told me directly I shouldn't be there. It's not, I'm not, it's not my fault that I was, again, this is all based on two factors. One, my skin color and ethnicity. And, how do I know this? Because here's the thing. It certainly wasn't based on my test scores of my SAT or LSAT, or the fact that I had finished school in a very short amount of time with very strong grades. It wasn't based on my academic performance. I knew that because my academic performance, I know statistically where it was within the group, right? And I also know the only people that heard things like I heard were people, the very small population of people that look like me. And when people would say these things to me, it would be based on not anything about my academic record. It would be based on their own sort of, I guess, projection of what they thought my skill set was related to what my appearance was, which brings up one of the reasons why I'm so obsessed with creating an environment where people feel safe to try, and they also know that I believe in them intrinsically, that their value and their intellect. This idea of stereotype and stereotype threat. Stereotype, of course, I'm going to make a decision based on what I think of an individual based on my association of them with groups. And it's not anything I know about them individually, but it's just what I think about. Oh, that's what I think about men. That's what I think about tall people. That's what I think about people from Alaska. That's what I think about, women. That's what that's where I think about, people with that skin color, whatever. That's part of it, which I have tons of stories on this. I directly experienced it, and it's really annoying. It's a lot of things, but one of the things that I think one-on-one for the student when they get this sort of from an educator or someone in administration is just annoying. Talk to me. Don't talk to what you think about what group you think I'm associated with or what group I'm in your mind. because it's just annoying. Now, it's a lot of other things. It can be destructive. It can ruin people. One of the reasons I always got so angry when I was a student, when people said stuff to me, is I thought, I personally, this is not going to impact me in terms of my outcome at all, because I am obsessed with my outcomes, right? That's part of the problem, right? So I'm moving quickly. I got stuff to do. You know, there's no way in the world I'm not going to achieve my goal of graduation or whatever the goal is. So to me, it was annoying. But here's the thing: I'm a bit of an anomaly, right? There are part of the reason there's such small numbers of some of my groups represented in really competitive schools is because historically we weren't allowed to go to these places. The law and the custom didn't allow us to be admitted, and then when we were, it's not been very friendly. And the numbers are tiny. I mean, I'm talking about being in a group that's 2% of an entire student population or less. I mean, small. So when you get numbers that are that tiny, one, you notice it because you have to, and then two, people keep reminding you of it and saying really ridiculous things that to me were ridiculous and annoying. But if I was someone who didn't have the confidence in myself that I belonged there, that's why people can drop out of a program. And that made me angry because I felt like, you know what? There are already so many actual real obstacles for people being admitted to competitive schools and even non-competitive. For a long period of history, just period, no one was going anywhere, right? No one of certain groups was going to any of these types of schools or graduate programs or anything. um, and that's an issue. And then beyond that, when some people do have the ability to apply and be admitted, then they're told to leave, which is just really not helpful. And again, like I said, for me, I felt like, okay, I just found it annoying and silly, ridiculous. But I was angry because I knew not everybody else in my situation would think that way. I knew if I was someone who came from a background where I believed I didn't belong in a certain academic program, and then someone told me I didn't belong there, who was the person in administration or a person that's in charge of a class, that could have negatively influenced me and made me think I should leave or quit. And I've had people told me to quit, which I thought was again beyond silly. And obviously I didn't. But as a professor, as a teacher, of course I carry all this with me, right? And one of the things when we talk about stereotype is, of course, the educator, administrator stereotyping what they perceive of the student, which is all useless usually. Um, and I think speaks to their lack of intellectual curiosity because people are individuals. So stereotypes are not really helpful. And of course, they're usually incredibly counterproductive. But they exist. The other part, though, is what the person who's being stereotyped thinks themselves. Stereotype threat, right? So in the show notes, I put a little link to a little explanation about stereotype threat. And this is where, so stereotype threat is when members of a group believed to be academically inferior. And then the link I says that I quote to says African American, which at different times in the culture have been called black, which Negro, colored. I'm sure there's a long list, and Latino students enrolled in college, or female students in math and science classes. Now look at that. I've been all of that, right? All of those negative, horrible groups score much lower on tests, and I said that, of course, sarcastically. Um, so let me go on. Members of groups believed to be academically inferior, African American, Latino students enrolled in college, or female students in math and science classes, score much lower on tests when reminded beforehand of their race or gender. Now, I'm not going to get into, we don't have the time certainly in the show, but many would argue that these ideas, race, things like this, they're just artificial constructs. They're just things humans make up. That it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Other people argue the exact opposite, that your race is everything. That it tells you your intellect, it tells you your athletic ability, it tells you how industrious you are, how honest you are. Okay, I'm not debating that right now. Here's the thing: people are aware when they're in a society of what this society thinks of their group, because you get the messages consistently. You can't miss it. You might not agree with it, you may disagree with it, you may totally agree with it, but you at least know what the message is because it's pervasive, right? Okay. So when somebody's in a group and they know what the society thinks of their group, and then you remind them before they take a test of what their group is or what their perception of their group is, and that how everybody sees that group, right? So you say to somebody, "Oh, it's girls are so bad at math. They're so stupid. It's too bad girls can't do math equations very well." and then you give them a math test, then what a surprise. They don't do as well as their skill set says they should do. And that's what the stereotype threat is. The threat of the stereotype, you just remind them, look what you are. Your group can't do this. You're in that group. That means you can't do this. Who are you to want to be a scientist? Who are you to want to go to college? Oh, this is choking me up. And the article I linked to, please go research all you want. I always encourage that. That's what I love, information. But the article I linked to gave an example of from the stereotype threat, right? So one example was that black students performed comparably with white students when they were told that the test they were taking was a laboratory problem-solving test. Okay, so that sounds benign, right? So they did as well as anybody else, right? Because amazingly, believe it or not, skin color or ethnicity or gender, there's a lot of research, and there's some people disagree with this, that means that those things don't define who you are. They're just part of all that makes up what you are. And that girls and females, yeah, they can do math and science. And that people who are certain skin colors or who are identified as African American or Latino, and this doesn't even matter how you identify yourself. This is how the world identifies you. Okay, so it's really interesting. Performed like everyone else because I would argue, maybe because they're humans, when they were told it's a laboratory problem-solving task. The article that I linked to says, black students scored much lower, however, when they were instructed that the test was meant to measure their intellectual ability. In effect, the prospect of social evaluation suppressed these students' intelligence. The article goes on to say, minorities aren't the only one vulnerable to stereotype threat. Now, minority, of course, is a loaded term itself, right? Are females minority if they're the majority of the population? I don't know. All right. I'm going to continue on with my editorializing. Okay, so minorities aren't the only one vulnerable to stereotype threat. We all are. I don't like how any of that is structured because it sounds as if it's written from the perspective of a non-minority author, and I don't. The we all are? I don't. Okay. Courtney, stop editorializing. Okay. Continuing from the source. A group of people notably confident about their mathematical abilities. White, male, math, and engineering majors who received high scores on the math portion of the SAT did worse on a math test when told that the experiment was intended to investigate why Asians appear to outperform other students on tests of math ability. Now think through that. So obviously whoever the author of this doesn't see themselves as a minority because of the way they structured those first two sentences that I editorialized on. But the fascinating thing is, oddly enough, I guess, to the author of the article, it's not something that a quote minority or a quote, if you apply that to women or apply that to ethnic minorities, African American, Hispanic, Latino. The idea was that all humans would sort of function in some ways psychologically similar, and that a white male who is an engineering and math major in a university, we can assume, and had received high scores on their math portion of the SAT, which is entrance test in the U.S. for universities, that they did worse when they were told the test was to investigate why Asians appear to outperform other students. So it's the same thing, right? You just tell them that there's a group that they're not in. And remind them that they're in a group that's the negative group, that is less than. And then tell them to go take that test. And then it does the same thing to all humans, whether it's a female or a male or an African American or a white male American, or I like to use European American, so we have some parity. But anyway, of terms, right? So if we're going to use white, we use black. If we're going to use African American, we use European American. Just to me, it sounds more consistent. All of it to me is useless in terms of telling me whether or not someone's intelligent. But the thing that's amazing is we are what we believe we're told to be. And that is powerful. So as an educator, if you know that, if the students have already, by the time they come to your class, they already been taught all these messages from society, from their family, from their life experience. I don't care if they're 5 years old. There's so much amazing research on this. The student already believes so much way before you get them. So if you get a 5-year-old, you have one level in a kindergarten class or a pre-K. If you have I have students who are 50 years old and 70 years old in my university classes and older. They have a lifetime of messages. So they believe all of this. And so much of it is just imaginary. If I tell you Asians, quote unquote, are smarter than you are, and then tell you to take a test, and you do worse, then that doesn't make any logical sense at all. You should be able to realize Asians was just a label. What does that mean? And the other thing is, why do we let this sort of messaging impact us? But these are questions for another show. The question here is, how do I teach the person? So one of the things I mentioned a while ago is I go, what some people say, overboard. I don't think it is. I'm just consistent with the message. And I believe that, here's the thing. I believe that if my student took the time to enroll and to be here, then they are here and they should be here. I believe that. Now, I don't know my students, personally before we start the program. I don't see the programs I teach in. We don't see their grades. I don't know anything about them. All I see is like a name on a roster. So I don't know what they did in their other classes. I don't know anything. I'm just ready to get in there and let's see what we can do to talk about the things that are in the course that I'm really interested and excited about. Now, sometimes a student isn't able to stay in a class. Maybe something happens with their schedule, something happens with their health, something happens in life, and they withdraw. And sometimes I'll see people, they don't have the ability to stay one term, they come back the next semester, and it's great. That's not an issue. That's individual to what's going on with that person. But this idea that the educator would be in any position to make a decision on whether or not what someone's capability is I find it's absurd. That person gets to decide. Are they going to come and turn their work in, or are they not going to turn it in? They decide. And does that, to me, and a lot of this is, of course, shaped by my own experience, does the fact that someone doesn't turn their work in relate to their gender? Does it relate to their age? Does it relate to their ethnicity? In my mind, absolutely not. That's insane. To me, that's what I think. So part of the reason that I go and I'm so positive, and I do this in writing a lot, I do it in my oral notes when I'm teaching online. I want them to know I'm happy you're here. I want you to be here. I'm happy I'm here. And that's not anything that I'm ashamed of. I like what I do. Some days I love it. If I didn't, I wouldn't do it. And since I'm able to do it, and I can do it in a way, again, I mentioned a long time ago at the beginning of the show, where I can, kind of feed my obsession for information, and I can interject it into the class and have discussions about things that I've read and that I think are interesting with people who are also interested. That makes me happy. So I'm grateful and appreciative to be alive and to be able to do this. And the fact that I'm enthusiastic about that and let people know that, I feel it's fine. Do some people probably think it's, a little bit um I don't know, hokey or fine, but it's real. And I want people to understand that during my little bit of time on earth, right? I'm here by my choice. It's not an accident. I'm in a classroom by my choice. And they're there by their choice. And so this idea of stereotype threat is, you have to understand that it happens, like the author of the piece I linked to, it happens to everybody. So take it away. Obviously, in many parts of the world, it's illegal, and in some places I would just argue it's unethical. But why on earth, before some sort of academic experience, would you sit there and, other than for some sort of psychological experience where you had consent, why would you play with this? I don't know. The reality is, yes, people have a lifetime of experience. Some people were brought up in environments where they were told they were amazing and wonderful and a genius, and they really have very weak skills. So those people get angry with me, as I said earlier, when I deal with the person who's super motivated but has weak skills. I let them know your skills are weak. Here's how we can improve them. But I don't just sit there and feed into some sort of narrative of inflated perception of what they're capable of. On the other hand, we have, I think, a larger group potentially of people who, for whatever reason, they're a female, they're a male, they're quote white, they're black, they're Hispanic. I mean, it's everybody, right? Who at some point they believe there's someone else who's better than them. And if you just remind them of that, they're not good enough. And some people also have other layers where other people, maybe in their family or caregivers or people they grew up with, told them they weren't good enough. It triggers this thing in their mind where they believe I'm not good enough. If you have, and we've talked about this in other programs, this idea where you attribute why things happen, okay? Attribution theory, right? We talked about this in other programs. Let's say I don't do well on a test. So some people would say, oh, I didn't do well on the test because I didn't study. Okay. So that's saying that now, next time, obviously, if I do study, I could do better. So if you attribute it to that kind of cause, then it usually gives you a better, potentially good outcome the next time. If you don't do well on a test and you say to yourself, oh my gosh, well, it's because I'm an idiot. It's because I'm too stupid. Now, you could specifically say, well, it's because I'm too stupid and I'm a girl or a female and I'm in a math or a science class and women are too stupid to do math and science. I mean, or you could add and say, well, it's because I'm African American or Latino or because I'm a white male I mean, we could go on forever, right? Um, but the core issue is if you believe you are incapable and you cannot change your intellect, your skill set, your intelligence, then what's the point in trying? And that's the most devastating um, underachiever student to ever encounter because it's a core way to define themselves. It's basically the student saying, I'm a failure and nothing I can do about it. I'm too dumb. I'm too stupid. I can't do anything about it. Now, they may add on to that. I'm too stupid because of my gender. I'm too stupid because of my ethnicity. I'm too stupid because of my color. I'm too stupid because of, my grandfather told me so. Who knows? But they believe that they can't do it, then they can't do it. It sounds cliche, but all of this science and the research basically underscores these points. So here's what I'm going to do as an educator to reach my underachiever and make my life potentially be able to be in my educator's Eden as long as possible. I'm taking that away. And part of the reason I'm consistently from before, the first moment of class, letting my students know I'm thrilled to be here. I'm excited. Here's the things why I'm excited about the program, why I'm excited about just life in general. Um, I want them to understand what the benefits of completing degrees and being passionate and excited about things, what they can do for them as a role model. The other thing is I want them to know I am appreciative and excited they're there. Now, I grade the work and the curriculum as I would with any other professional endeavor. So if it's not the quality it needs to be, it's not the quality. And the student earns the grade that the work, was commensurate with. But I want the student to know that them as a person, oh, I am the biggest fan and supporter. And of course they can do anything they want to. Of course they can. Why not them? And part of what I'm doing, of course, is I'm trying to counteract stereotype on my own part. I'm trying to counteract stereotype threat to my students and take that crap off the table. And I did use that word because it's garbage. Why on earth am I going to mess around with the opportunity for someone to achieve a skill set and potentially maybe a degree or certificate or something that could open up more opportunity for them because they're sitting around telling themselves in their head they're not good enough? I mean, that's such a waste. So I'm trying to counteract it. And the other thing is, I believe it. Of course they're there. Why not them? Who am I to tell anybody else their value as a person other than, you know what, I am so happy you're here and how can I help? Now, like I said, I grade. I mean, the performance is the core issue. So I can totally believe in you as a person and still at the same time recognize that you didn't show up and you didn't turn your work in and you have, you're failing the class. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means here's what's happened. Here's the math. Here's what's going on. And many times it's a situation, like I said, somebody needs to just take the time away or step back, or maybe it's a bad time. Maybe they need the extra skills development that they weren't aware was such a deficit. But that's what I'm here for. I believe in them. I believe in me. So you teach the overachiever by understanding big picture. Like I said at the beginning, ask them why they're there. That's the first thing I do in a class. And listen when they tell you. The other thing is, before you ask them, you need to ask yourself. If you are not in that classroom for these reasons that is part of your Eden, you feel like you're living the dream in your life. Not every moment of your life is just, bliss, but overall you enjoy this. If you're miserable, trust me, everybody else knows. And I've said in other programs, and obviously you're not an educator's Eden, and it's something you might want to reevaluate um, about being in that position, because you really can do damage with someone who has this the vision of themselves where they're not worthy. Simultaneously, I do everything I can to combat these ideas of stereotype threat and also kind of learned helplessness, where somebody believes they're not good enough, and then they sort of become so ingrained to expect the worst. And so I want them to know that collectively I believe in them. Individually, I also believe in them. And because I believe in them, I'm going to do everything I can to be as effective as an evaluator as possible, because I know what the professional expectation is. I'm not going to cheat a student by just not doing my job and everybody gets the top grade, even really poorly constructed work, because then what? Then they go into a job and submit that and think it's what it needs to be, the high caliber work? Of course not. They deserve to have the best uh, information and feedback. They deserve to understand where they need help and development. They need to understand that this is all something that's part of the totality of what they're capable of as a person. They are fantastic. Here's what they need to do to become more skilled in this area or that area. You're underachiever that's motivated enough to show up, you can do what you can to create an environment for them to meet their own needs. Remember, some people, if they get literally, the point they need to pass at that point in their life, that is enough. And they actually have met, maybe even surpassed their goals. They even pay attention a little bit if you were engaging. So that underachievers achieved and sometimes overachieved what they thought they would, right? Do everything in your power to ask yourself why you're there. Do everything in your power to understand what motivates your individual students. And then you need to have some understanding of how larger external forces shape people's behavior. And you need to look at the way you communicate with people and then the circumstances. If you set something up and say to people, this is going to be awesome, this is going to be great, here's how we're going to do it. Transparency. Look at a lot of the other programs I do about grading and feedback and how much, because you want to make it where it's repetitive to your overachievers. Like, golly, the lady explained it 15 times. Yeah, because I want everybody to have a chance to get it. But there's some people who didn't understand it the first 14 times I explained it, but the 15th time they did. So it's about setting that environment and then having people understand, no matter what the performance is, that their value is just phenomenal as a person. And then giving them the tools and the feedback to help them understand what they need to do to develop their skill set professionally, empirically, to get where it needs to be. Again, my personal belief, I do believe honestly it is a privilege to be an educator. I've shared a little bit in this episode about some of the things that have motivated me to be the best example I can from my own experience as a student, as thinking about things that impacted me. I implore you to really think about these things, um, and to try to make sure that you're creating that educator's Eden that works for you, and that your student, irrespective of what their grade is. I personally am not. I mean, they're not my grade, so I mean, I want my student to feel they met and surpassed their goals, and that they learned something, and that it was interesting, and that it was engaging, and that it was memorable, and that and that they have something they can take with them academically through the rest of their lives, irrespective of whether they got the highest grade or the lowest F. You know there's honor in just stepping up to be a student, and I am as privileged and grateful for you to join me in the program as I am for the students who have been part of my classes over the last 16, 17 years. What a privilege it's been. So thank you. I do want to encourage you again to go to CourtneyAnderson.com, and I want to encourage you to continue to communicate with me and let me know if there's anything that I can do to help you improve or consider tools and techniques for your maximum happiness as an educator. Thank you again.